On the bottom of page 135 in your textbook, the author takes a little time to discuss how the float feature works in Internet Explorer 6. His point is that it doesn't work as may be expected if you're looking at your code in another browser. And that's a good point to make. Right here I'm using Chrome as my browser of choice. It's the one that I'll normally use. But when I'm developing web pages, I have to consider other web browsers as well. It really doesn't matter what browser I like to use. It matters what browser my audience wants to use. You may have heard of names like Firefox, Internet Explorer, maybe even Opera or Safari. All of these web browsers have unique characteristics that can cause some of your code to look different from one browser to the next. So you may develop some HTML that looks just great in the browser you use, but may not look as good in the browser that some of your audience is using. That's why it's important to test your code on multiple browsers. Now, while it's important to test code on multiple browsers, you have to make decisions about how important it is to test on a specific browser. The author specifically mentions IE version 6. So for every web browser I just mentioned, Internet Explorer, Firefox, Safari, Chrome, there also are different versions. Version 1, 2, 3. In Internet Explorer, we're approaching version 10 now. That's a lot of testing. One of the decisions you're going to have to make, along with your clients, is to decide which browsers really need to be tested. It can be a big task. And for some lesser known browsers, there can be small problems that show up in the way the code is implemented that may not be worth fixing because of the size of the market. It's good to know that there's resources online that can help you figure out exactly what the size of the market is. Now, it's going to vary depending on your target audience. If your audience is targeted toward Apple users, well, you're probably going to have to be more concerned about Safari than Internet Explorer. If your site is more targeted toward Microsoft users, maybe Internet Explorer is the browser of choice, the browser that you need to spend the most time on. The reality is, though, most of your sites are not going to be focused to a technology-specific audience. They're going to be focused to the general audience, and you're going to want as broad as acceptance as possible. You're going to want your code to work, if possible, in all browsers. Sometimes it's just not possible to hit every single browser. I'm going to do a quick web search here in Google on web browser market share. Keep in mind that none of these tools are going to give us a 100% accurate look at the current stats related to web browsers, but it will give you a picture into what's happening. Here's one I have chosen from w3schools.com. You can take a look here and see for the month of August 2012, 16% of all users on the web were using the browser Internet Explorer. 32% Firefox, 43% Chrome, and 4% Safari, with just 2% using Opera. Keep in mind that these statistics are not actually showing you what everyone is using on the web, just what their sample is using. You can click any of these different browser names and actually get a breakdown by version. So I'm going to do that here. Since your book talks about IE, or Internet Explorer version 6, let's go ahead and click on Internet Explorer. We'll notice that for the month of August, Internet Explorer version 6 in this column here was only used by 0.5% of all users in this survey. Even nearly a year ago, in January of 2012, that number was only about 1%. So one of the questions you have to ask yourself when you run into problems while testing a specific browser is how important is fixing the HTML for that one specific browser going to be? How much time and effort should I put into it? Now, if you're trying to target an audience maybe within an institution where they use IE6 as their primary browser, you may have to adjust your code so it works well in that specific browser. But in most cases, if you run into some obstacles that are hard to correct, on this one specific version of a specific browser where only between 0.5% and 1% of the users are using that version, you may just decide to let it slide and allow your HTML to not work correctly in that specific browser.